She tossed the diamond bracelet into the restaurant fountain in front of everyone and walked out on the most eligible bachelor in Toronto. That was the night billionaire CEO Clara Davidson drove herself home for the first time in years. Mascara on her cheeks, heels in her hand, and stopped dead on a quiet street in Esquimalt, British Columbia. Because through a lit window next door, a man in a Royal Canadian Navy uniform was slow dancing with his 7-year-old daughter to a song on a phone speaker. She didn't know his name yet, but something inside her cracked open. The bracelet had cost $50,000 CAD. Clara Davidson knew that because Richard Sterling had made sure she knew 3 times over the course of dinner in 3 different ways, each one more deliberate than the last. First, when the sommelier brought the wine, I picked the 2009 Burgundy, same year I closed my first $100 million deal. Cost more than most people's cars, but you're worth it, Clara. Then when the appetizers arrived, I had this bracelet commissioned. $50,000. Platinum setting. The jeweler said, the stones are flawless, like you. And finally, halfway through the entree, when he leaned across the white linen and lowered his voice like he was offering her something sacred. I think we'd make a remarkable couple, Clara. Think about what our 2 companies could build together. Think about the optics. The optics. She set down her fork. Across the candlelit table, Richard Sterling Old Bay Street money, custom suit. Cap Teeth was smiling at her the way men smiled at acquisitions. Richard, she said quietly. Do you actually know anything about me? Anything? Not from a press release, not from my LinkedIn. Not from a profile and report. On Business Magazine? Anything real? He blinked. I know you built Clarion Tech from a startup into a $2.5 billion company before you were 40. I know you're the most. What's my daughter's name? Silence. I don't have a daughter, she said. But you didn't even hesitate to think whether you knew. You don't know the first thing about me, Richard. You know my valuation. She stood up. He reached across the table and caught her wrist gently, but with the confidence of a man who rarely heard the word no. Clara. The bracelet. She unclasped it, set it on the edge of her water glass, and picked up her clutch. Keep it, she said, or donate it, or throw it in the fountain out front. I genuinely don't care. She walked out of Le Select on a Tuesday night in November, through the gold-lit lobby, past the valet stand, and directly to her own car, the one she almost never drove because someone was always driving her somewhere. She sat in the front seat for a full minute without starting the engine. The leather smelled new. The city glittered through the windshield. Her phone was already lighting up. Her assistant, her PR manager, someone from the board, Richard himself. She turned the phone face down on the passenger seat, and she drove. She hadn't meant to end up in Esquimalt. She'd been living in the house there for almost 4 months, a decision her real estate agent had called an eccentric choice, and her CFO had called a liability because the property was modest by any standard that applied to Clara Davidson's life. 3 bedrooms, a narrow porch, a neighborhood of military families and retired teachers, and small yards with Canadian flags and wind chimes. She'd bought it on impulse after a 12-hour board meeting, opened Google Maps, typed quiet, and somehow ended up touring a house 20 minutes from CFB Esquimalt. Her team thought she was having a breakdown. Maybe she was, or maybe she was just tired of living in a glass tower in Vancouver where the silence echoed. She pulled into her driveway at 9:40 p.m. and sat there. The street was the kind of quiet that doesn't exist in most of the world anymore. The kind with crickets and porch lights, and the distant sound of the ocean underneath everything else. She exhaled for what felt like the first time all evening. That's when she saw the light next door. She wasn't trying to look, but her neighbor's living room window faced the street, and the curtains weren't drawn, and the warm amber glow of a lamp spilled across the front walk in a way that made the whole yard look like a painting. She got out of the car, and she heard it before she understood what she was seeing. A song, something old, something she half recognized playing from what sounded like a phone speaker. And then laughter. A child's laughter, high and bright, the kind that seems physically impossible to fake, and underneath it, a man's low voice, saying something she couldn't make out. And more laughter. And then she moved without thinking, just 2 steps toward the sidewalk. And through the window she saw them, a man in a Royal Canadian Navy dress uniform number 1S, like he'd just come from somewhere formal, dancing with a little girl in pajamas. She couldn't have been more than 7. She had her bare feet on top of his shoes, and he was moving slow and exaggerated, spinning her in tiny circles. And every time he dipped her, she screamed with joy and grabbed his collar with both fists. He said something. She said something back, too quiet for Clara to hear. He laughed. Not a polished laugh. Not a cocktail party laugh. The real kind. The kind that takes you by surprise. Clara stood on the sidewalk in a $5,000 dress and $50 heels, holding a clutch bag and the remains of a very bad evening. And she could not make herself walk the 8 steps to her own front door. She didn't know how long she stood there. Long enough that the song ended. Long enough that the man scooped the little girl up in one motion. She wrapped her arms around his neck and went limp the way children do when they're surrendering to sleep, and carried her out of the room. The window went amber and still. Clara finally moved. She walked to her front door, unlocked it, and stood in her entryway. The house was exactly as she'd left it, perfectly maintained, expensively furnished, absolutely silent. She set her clutch on the console table. She sat down on the bottom stair, and for the first time in a very long time, Clara Davidson, who had built a $2.5 billion company, who had been on the cover of Canadian Business twice, who had never once in her professional life cried in front of anyone, put her face in her hands. Not because of Richard Sterling, not because of the bracelet, or the dinner, or the optics, but because of a song she couldn't name playing through a phone speaker, and a little girl in pajamas and a laugh that had no performance in it at all. His name was Joel Carter. She found that out the next morning because he was in his driveway at 6:15 a.m. loading a duffel bag into the back of a truck, and he glanced up when she opened her front door with coffee she'd forgotten was in her hand. "Morning," he said. Simple, easy. "Morning," she said. She must have looked a little rough. She hadn't slept especially well because he looked at her for a second with the kind of attention that isn't rude but isn't nothing either. "You just move in?" he asked. "Few months ago, right? I feel like I've seen your car but never actually." He stopped, extended his hand across the low fence between their yards. Joel Carter. Clara Davidson. He nodded like that meant nothing in particular. In her world, her name made people's faces change. A flicker of calculation, a pivot, a recalibration. His face did none of those things. "You doing okay?" he asked. She blinked. "What? You look a little." He tilted his head slightly. Not unkind, like maybe yesterday was a long day. She laughed before she could stop herself. "Yesterday was a very long day." "I hear that." He zipped the duffel. "I've got a few more of those coming." He glanced back toward the house. "Emma's still asleep. I've got maybe 20 minutes before the chaos starts." "Emma? My daughter." He said it the way people say the names of things they're most proud of, no preamble. Just "my daughter," like it contained everything necessary. "How old?" 7. Going on 37. "She's already corrected my math twice this week." He grinned. "Don't tell her she's right. She doesn't need the encouragement." Clara smiled. An actual one. She noticed the kind her face did without asking permission. "Joel," she started, not entirely sure where she was going. He looked at her. "I saw you last night," she said. "Through the window." I wasn't being strange about it. I just pulled in and I could hear the music and She stopped. "You were dancing with her." Something moved across his face, quiet and private. "She makes me do that," he said. "Every time I come home in my dress uniform, she says it means we have to dance." I don't know where she got that from. A beat. Her mom. Probably her mom. The way he said it told her everything she needed to know about the past tense. She didn't push. "It looked like a good night," she said instead. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "It was." She learned the rest in pieces over the weeks that followed. His wife's name had been Danielle. She'd died 3 years earlier, an accident swift and senseless, the kind that leaves no warning and no room for preparation. Emma had been 4. Joel had been 31, mid-career Navy. Suddenly a single father with a deployment rotation, and a daughter who woke up crying for a woman who wasn't coming back. Clara didn't learn this from Joel directly. She learned it the way you learn the important things about neighbors, gradually, sideways. In the in-between moments. From Emma, who mentioned my mom in heaven with the matter-of-fact gravity that young children sometimes carry about the largest things. From Mrs. Petrova across the street, who had been watching Emma on Joel's late nights since before Clara moved in and who told the story with eyes that had clearly shed tears over it before. She learned that Joel Carter reported to the base at 5 a.m. on the days he wasn't deployed, that he coached Emma's soccer team on Saturday mornings despite sleeping 4 hours some nights, that he could fix a leaking pipe, build a bookshelf, and had exactly one houseplant, a cactus named Gerald, that Emma had given him, which he somehow managed to overwater. She also learned in the particular way you learn things that aren't meant to flatter you, that he had no idea who she was. Not in a pretend way, not in an I'm playing it cool way. He genuinely did not know. She discovered this on a Saturday afternoon when Emma came to her door with a math worksheet and the confidence of someone who knocks on neighbors' doors often. Joel had told her to stop bothering the nice lady next door. Emma had interpreted this as encouragement. Dad said you probably have better things to do, Emma announced, settling herself at Clara's kitchen table like she lived there. But I told him you look like someone who's good at fractions. Did you? Are you good at fractions? I'd built a $2.5 billion company, Clara said dryly. I can manage fractions. Emma looked at her with complete sincerity. What's a $2.5 billion company? A math problem, Clara said. A very large one. Come on, show me the worksheet. Joel appeared at her door 40 minutes later, still in a paint-stained t-shirt, looking simultaneously embarrassed and resigned. I'm so sorry, he said. She does this. She's been doing this since she could walk. She just... He looked past Clara to where Emma was now eating an apple at the kitchen table. Worksheet finished, explaining something to Clara's houseplants. Emma, we talked about this. The fractions are done, Emma said without looking up. Miss Clara is very smart. You don't have to call her. It's fine, Clara said. She can stay. I was just going to make dinner. Joel looked at her. You don't have to do that. I know. I don't have to. I want to. Unless you have somewhere to be. He looked at her for a moment. Then at Emma, who was now humming to herself. I don't have anywhere to be, he said quietly. Then come in, she said. And he did. That was how it started. Not with grand gestures, not with declarations or careful plans, with fractions and a math worksheet and a 7-year-old who had no interest in boundaries. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. Joel fixed the section of fence that had been listing since October. He didn't offer. He just showed up with tools one Saturday and did it while Emma sat on the porch narrating his progress. Clara made coffee and handed it over the fence without comment. She started helping Emma with homework too. Sometimes 3 afternoons a week. Emma was sharper than she let on, quick with numbers, creative in her reasoning, and deeply suspicious of being told she was smart, as if compliments were a trap. You're not just saying that? Emma asked one afternoon after Clara confirmed that she'd solved the problem correctly. Emma, I have a CFO and a chief strategy officer whose job it is to tell me I'm smart. I'm not wasting flattery on a second grader. You got it right. Emma stared at her. Then she wrote her name at the top of the worksheet in letters big enough to take up a third of the page. Joel saw it when he picked her up that evening, and said nothing. But Clara caught the look on his face, that same quiet private thing, and she understood that he was doing math of a different kind. Calculating something he didn't yet have a name for. Neither did she. That was the first month. By the second month, dinners had become a thing that simply happened. By the third, Emma had stopped asking if she could come over and simply arrived. And Joel Carter, Chief Petty Officer, Royal Canadian Navy, widower, single father man who had survived things that would have broken most people, had stopped knocking on her door and started walking through it. She was reading on her porch on a Thursday evening when he sat down in the other chair, the one that had started as the spare and somewhere along the way become his, and was quiet for a while. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You're going to anyway." He looked sideways at her. "You never talk about your work." "You never ask." "I'm asking now." She set down her book. "What do you want to know?" "Emma says you built a company. Mrs. Petrova says you're on the cover of magazines." He paused. "I looked you up." Something in her went still. "Okay," she said carefully. "Why are you here, Clara?" He wasn't accusing her. His voice was level, genuinely curious. "You could live anywhere. You could live in a penthouse in Vancouver. You could have." He stopped, searched for the words. "Why this street?" She looked out at the yard. The cactus named Gerald was visible through the window. Emma had drawn a face on the pot in permanent marker. "I came home from work one night," she said slowly, "and I stood in my apartment, the very expensive apartment with the view of the whole city, and I thought, if I disappeared right now, how long before anyone noticed? Not my assistant, not my board. Someone who would just notice because they missed me." Joel was quiet. "I couldn't answer the question," she said. "That scared me more than anything that has ever happened in a boardroom." He didn't say "I'm sorry" or "that must be hard," or any of the things people say when they don't know what else to say. He just sat with it for a moment, treating it like it deserved. "Emma would notice," he said finally. Clara turned and looked at him. He was looking straight ahead, elbows on his knees, watching the street. "She would notice by the next afternoon," he said. "She'd make me come check on you. She'd probably write you a card." Clara's throat tightened. "Yeah," she said. Her voice came out a little rough. "I know she would." A beat of quiet settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not weighted, just real. The kind of quiet that only exists between two people who have stopped performing for each other. On the street, a neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. Somewhere behind them inside the house, Emma was asleep, and Joel Carter, without looking at her, reached over and put his hand briefly over hers 1 second, 2, and then pulled it back without a word. Neither of them said anything about it, but neither of them forgot it either. 3 weeks later, he received his deployment orders, and everything Clara Davidson thought she understood about her own heart cracked open like a fault line. The orders came on a Wednesday. Joel told her on a Thursday evening, standing in her kitchen while Emma was in the next room watching a movie, keeping his voice low and his face carefully arranged into the expression men like him practice for moments like this. Steady, matter of fact. Like it was just logistics. 8 months, he said. Maybe closer to 9. They're not giving me an exact date yet, but probably end of the month. Clara set down the dish she was drying. 8 months, she repeated. It's not my first, won't be my last. He said it the way people say things they've had to say before. Not cold, just worn smooth from repetition. The hard part is Emma. What does she know? She knows deployment. She's grown up with it. He exhaled slowly. Doesn't mean she likes it. Clara turned back to the sink. She ran the water for a second, even though she didn't need to, just to have something to do with her hands. Who watches her? She asked. When you're gone? Mrs. Petrova takes her after school. There's a woman from the Military Family Resource Center who helps on weekends. I've got it covered. He paused. I've always got it covered. There was something in the way he said that. I've always got it covered that was less like confidence and more like a thing he'd told himself enough times that it had become reflex. She turned around. Joel. He looked at her. I could help, she said. With Emma. He shook his head before she finished the sentence. Clara, I'm serious. I know you're serious. I appreciate it, but you have a company to run. You've got. I work from home 3 days a week, she said. I have a driver. I have flexibility that most people don't have, and I want to use it for her. He was quiet for a moment. She's not your responsibility, he said quietly. No, Clara said. She's not. But she matters to me, and so do you. She held his gaze. Let me help. Joel Carter looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that takes inventory of something, that checks the weight of a thing before deciding whether to trust it. Then Emma appeared in the doorway in her socks holding her juice box, having evidently heard enough through the wall to have opinions. Miss Clara should watch me, Emma announced. She knows fractions, and she makes good pasta, and she never forgets to put my hair in the right kind of braid. Joel closed his eyes briefly. Emma, I'm just saying what's true, Dad. You always say to tell the truth. Clara bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. Joel opened his eyes and looked at his daughter, then at Clara, then back at his daughter. He had the look of a man who understood that the decision had already been made without him. We'll talk about it, he said. Emma looked at Clara. Clara looked at Emma. He means yes, Emma said confidently, and went back to her movie. The corner of Joel's mouth moved just barely. She's going to be terrifying when she's older, he said. She already is, Clara said. Pasta's in 10 minutes. Sit down. He sat down, and for the rest of the evening, they didn't talk about deployment, or logistics, or how many months were left on the calendar. They talked about Emma's soccer tournament, and the cactus named Gerald, who appeared to be, against all odds, thriving. They talked about a book Clara was reading that Joel had read 3 years ago on a previous deployment, and they argued pleasantly about the ending for 20 minutes. Emma fell asleep on the couch between them sometime around 9. Joel carried her home. He stood in Clara's doorway for a moment before he left. Thank you, he said. For dinner, and for the other thing? The other thing, she said, offering. He looked at her steadily. It means something, she nodded. I know it does. He left. She stood in her own doorway for a while after he was gone. The way she'd stood on the sidewalk that first night, watching the light in his window. Only now she understood something she hadn't understood then. She hadn't stopped walking because she saw a happy family. She'd stopped walking because she recognized something she'd been missing so long she'd almost stopped knowing it was gone. The remaining 3 weeks before deployment were both too fast and too slow. The particular cruelty of countdowns, Emma knew. They'd told her on a Sunday morning at the kitchen table with the kind of careful gentleness that parents develop when they've had to deliver hard news more than once. Emma had gotten very quiet, which was unusual, and had asked 3 questions in precise order. When are you leaving? When are you coming back? Are you going to call me? Joel had answered all 3. Emma had nodded. Then she'd gotten up, walked to the living room, and turned on cartoons at a volume that made it clear the conversation was over. Joel had looked at Clara across the table. Clara had looked back at him. Give her a few hours, Clara said quietly. By afternoon, Emma had returned to the kitchen and asked if she could go to Clara's to practice her multiplication tables, which was not something she had ever voluntarily offered to do before. Clara walked her through tables of 6, 7, and 8 for 40 minutes, and said nothing about the fact that Emma kept rubbing her eyes. Not allergies, not tiredness. At one point, Emma put her pencil down and said without looking up from the paper, Miss Clara, do you think my dad worries about me when he's gone? Every single minute, Clara said. No, hesitation. Emma was quiet. Does he worry that something will happen to me, or does he worry that I'll be sad? Clara looked at this 7-year-old, this child who was small and sharp and carrying something much heavier than multiplication tables, and said, both. But mostly he worries that you'll miss him and he misses you before he even leaves. Emma picked up her pencil. Okay, she said. She finished the worksheet. She got every problem right. Oh. The last night before deployment, Joel knocked on Clara's door at 10 p.m. Emma was already at Mrs. Petrova's. They'd said their goodbyes that evening, which had been, by Joel's brief and restrained account, a lot. He looked tired. Not the tired that comes from a long day. The tired that comes from holding yourself together for someone else's sake. And only now at 10 being somewhere you didn't have to. I should be sleeping, he said. Probably, she agreed. I'm not tired. I know. Come in. He came in. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee neither of them particularly needed, and the quiet of a house at night. I keep making lists, he said. Things Emma needs, things Mrs. Petrova needs to know. Which vitamin she actually takes versus the ones she hides in the couch cushions. The purple ones, Clara said. She told me. He blinked. She told you? She said they taste like the bad kind of grape. I ordered a different brand last week. Cherry. She's been taking them. Joel stared at her. You? She's been hiding them for 3 months and you fixed it in a week? She just needed to be asked, Clara said simply. He shook his head slowly, not in frustration, in something more complicated than that. I need you to know something, he said. His voice shifted lower, more careful. When I'm out there, I don't worry about a lot of things. I've trained for this for 15 years. I know how to do my job. He stopped, looked at his coffee cup. But Emma. I know, Clara said. I need her to be okay. She will be. I need her to feel like someone. He stopped again. This was hard for him. She could tell. Not the deployment, not the danger, but this the asking. Someone sees her. Not just watches her. Sees her. Clara put down her cup. Joel, look at me. He looked up. I see her, Clara said. I will see her every single day you are gone. I will do her homework with her, and go to her soccer games and make the right kind of pasta and figure out every vitamin she won't take. I will call you when something is wonderful, and I will call you when something is hard, and I will be honest about both. She held his gaze. She is not a favor. She is Emma. And Emma matters to me. Joel Carter, Navy Chief Petty Officer man who had faced things that would hollow out most people, looked at her across a kitchen table at 10 the night before deployment. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, how are you real? She laughed, surprised. What? I mean it. He shook his head slightly. 3 months ago you were a stranger in the house next door. Now I'm. He stopped. Now, I don't know what I'd do without you. The words landed in the room and stayed. Neither of them touched them directly. They were both too careful for that, standing at the edge of something neither had named. You'd manage, she said finally. You always do. Yeah. He looked at her. But I'm glad I don't have to. He left at midnight. He had to report at 4 a.m. She stood in her doorway and watched him cross the yard to his own house, and he paused at his door and turned back once, just briefly. Just long enough to raise one hand. She raised hers. He went inside. She didn't sleep much. She had not understood before this what the days of someone else's absence felt like when that absence belonged to someone who mattered. She understood it now. The first week was adjustment. Emma transitioned from Mrs. Petrova's routine to splitting time between Clara and the MFRC program with the adaptability of a child who had learned early that adaptability was non-negotiable. She arrived at Clara's on Monday afternoon with her backpack and a look of composed determination that Clara recognized because she'd seen it on Joel. Okay, Emma said, setting her bag on what had become her chair at Clara's kitchen table. Dad said I have to be good. You're always good, Clara said. I'm not always good, Emma said honestly. Sometimes I'm bad at listening, and I sometimes don't like eating the vegetables. Which vegetables? The green ones. That's not a vegetable. That's a category. Emma considered this. All of them in the category. We'll negotiate, Clara said. Backpack on the chair, snack first, then homework. Emma relaxed visibly. The small releasing of tension that children do when they understand that someone knows the rhythm, that the rhythm will hold. Miss Clara, she said, pulling out her worksheet. Em, are you and my dad friends? Clara paused only half a second. Yes. Good friends. Good friends. Clara confirmed. Emma chewed her pencil eraser, a habit Clara had been unsuccessfully discouraging for 6 weeks. Mrs. Petrova says you're more than that. Mrs. Petrova needs a hobby. Emma grinned. It was, Clara noted with a complicated feeling, Joel's grin. I think so too, Emma said. That you're more than that. She looked down at her worksheet. I like it. Clara said nothing, but she held on to that sentence for a long time after Emma had moved on to fractions. The video calls came on a rotating schedule that depended on connectivity, timing, and the particular operational rhythms of a naval deployment thousands of miles away. Joel was reliable when he could be, and unreachable when he couldn't. And Clara learned to hold both realities without letting the gaps fill with fear. The first call was 3 weeks in. Emma held the tablet. Joel's face pixelated slightly on the screen, and the two of them talked over each other for 20 minutes about soccer and Gerald the cactus, and a story Emma was writing about a dog who could fly. Clara stayed off screen. She was washing dishes. She wasn't trying to be invisible, just present without intruding. The way you learn to be in a space that belongs to two people first. Is Miss Clara there? Joel asked eventually. Emma turned the tablet. Clara dried her hands and leaned into frame. Joel looked tired. Not the same tired as his last night. This was different, operational, the tired of sustained focus and constant readiness. But when he saw her, something in his face shifted. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. How is she? He meant Emma, but he was looking at Clara. She beat her own record in the 200-meter last Saturday. She has an opinion about every vegetable in the green category, and she's been taking the cherry vitamins every morning without being asked. Joel blinked. He looked at Emma. You have been? Emma shrugged with great dignity. They taste better. He laughed. That real laugh. The one with no performance in it. It came through the pixels, a little broken, a little delayed, and it still made something in Clara's chest move sideways. Thank you, he said, looking back at her. Stop thanking me, she said. I'll stop when I mean it less. Emma made a face between them. You're both being weird, she announced. Dad, tell me about the ocean. He told her about the ocean. Clara went back to the dishes. She stood at the sink and listened to his voice come through the speaker, low and unhurried, describing the color of water at a particular latitude, the way the stars looked without city light underneath them. And she understood with absolute clarity, in the way you only understand things when they're not available to you, exactly what Joel Carter had come to mean to her. The trouble, when it started, was quiet at first. She didn't notice the first item, a small piece in a tech blog, the kind of gossip column that ran items about CEOs and their off-hour lives, noting that Clara Davidson had been spotted at a youth soccer tournament in Esquimalt 3 weekends in a row. She noticed the second piece. A longer profile, the kind that dressed itself as analysis, ran in a financial magazine under the headline, Clarion CEO's Personal Life. What investors need to know. She read it standing in her kitchen at 6 in the morning. Emma still asleep in the guest room, where she'd stayed over because it was easier on school nights now. The piece was careful to keep its tone neutral, while making its implications clear. Sources close to the Davidson family, meaning her mother, almost certainly expressed concern about Clara's recent lifestyle choices and her apparent attachment to a working-class community near the naval base. Working-class community. She set her phone face down, picked it up again, read the sentence again. This street, this neighborhood of military families and retired teachers and wind chimes, and an overwatered cactus named Gerald. Working-class community. She set her phone down again, this time more carefully. The way you put something down when what you want to do is throw it. Miss Clara? Emma appeared in the doorway, hair everywhere, squinting against the kitchen light. Why are you up? Early meeting. Clara said. Automatic. Go back to sleep. I can't. Gerald's light was on. She meant the lamp by the window. Clara had taken Gerald in for the deployment, and Emma had given him a nightlight. Gerald's fine. I know. I just wanted to check. Emma padded to the windowsill and peered at the cactus. He looks good. He looks exactly like he always looks, Clara said. That's how you know he's good, Emma said, with the solemn certainty of someone who had thought about this. She turned around. Miss Clara, are you okay? Clara looked at this 7-year-old girl, this child who had learned to read people's faces the way children learn to read the weather as a survival skill, because it had always mattered. Yes, Clara said. I'm okay. Emma looked at her for a moment with Joel's eyes, with Joel's particular steady attention. Okay, she said. But you can tell me if you're not. Clara felt the back of her throat go tight. I know, she said softly. I know I can. Emma nodded, satisfied. She went to the table and sat down. Can we have eggs? She asked. Yes, Clara said. The scrambled kind with the cheese inside? Yes. Okay. Emma put her chin in her hands. I'll watch so I can learn. Clara got out the eggs. Outside somewhere in the neighborhood, a car started. Someone was leaving early, getting to work. Living a quiet life on a quiet street in Esquimalt that someone somewhere had called a working-class community like it was a warning. She cracked the first egg. She thought about what it would cost her to stay. She thought about what it would cost her to leave. And then Emma said in the conversational way of children who don't know they're saying something important, Dad says the best things in life are the ones worth fighting for. Clara looked at her. Did he? He says it a lot, Emma said. Especially about soccer. And about me. She paused. I think he'd say it about you, too. The pan went on the stove. The eggs went in, and Clara made a decision, quietly, somewhere between the first and second minute, that she was not going to be a person who ran from a fight. She'd built a $2.5 billion company. She could survive a magazine article. What she could not survive, she understood this now with the certainty of someone who had finally located a thing they'd been looking for without knowing it was missing, was losing this. This kitchen, this street, this small extraordinary life that had somehow become the truest thing she'd lived in years. She was still there when Joel called that evening, and the reception was bad, and Emma held the tablet at the wrong angle for most of the call, and none of it mattered at all. The magazine article was only the beginning. By the following Monday, 3 more pieces had run, 2 in financial publications, 1 in a celebrity gossip column that had no business covering corporate governance, but did it anyway with the particular enthusiasm of people who enjoy watching someone else's careful life come apart. The gossip column ran a photo, Clara at Emma's soccer tournament, kneeling on the sideline, tying Emma's cleat. Emma's face was blurred, editorial standard for minors, but Clara's face was clear, unguarded, caught in the middle of saying something that made Emma laugh. It was objectively a good photograph. Clara stared at it for a long time. Then her phone rang. Her mother's name on the screen. She let it ring. It rang again 20 minutes later, then again. On the 4th call, she picked up. Clara. Her mother's voice carried the particular tone she'd developed over decades. Not quite alarm, not quite disappointment. Something that combined both and called itself concern. I've been calling. I know, Mom. I've had 3 of your father's colleagues call this morning asking me what's going on with you. There's nothing going on. There are photographs of you at a great children's soccer game in a pause that contained an entire worldview. Esquimalt. I'm aware of where I live. You live on the Bridle Path in Toronto. That house in BC is an investment property. I live where I choose to live, Clara said, just like I always have. Her mother exhaled. It was a very precise exhale. Controlled, communicative. Clara. I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling because your board is talking. Margaret Fenwick called your father yesterday. Margaret Fenwick can call whoever she wants. She's on your board. I know she's on my board. I appointed her. Then you know she has concerns. Clara moved to the window. Outside, Emma was in the front yard throwing a soccer ball against the fence and catching it, a rhythm she could maintain indefinitely, and did regularly whenever she was thinking about something. What kind of concerns? Clara asked, though she already knew. About your focus. About whether you're. Another careful pause. Whether you're getting distracted. There's a perception issue, sweetheart. A CEO of your stature living next door to a. Say it. Mom. Silence. Say what you mean. Clara said quietly. I'd rather hear it plain. A Navy non-commissioned officer. Her mother's voice was very even. With a child who has nothing to do with your world. Clara watched Emma throw the ball, catch it, throw it again. You know what I keep thinking about? After, Clara said. I keep thinking about the gala 2 years ago, the humanitarian one where I gave a speech about the importance of human connection and community, and everyone applauded. I got a standing ovation. She paused. And now I'm actually living that way, and it's a perception problem. That's not fair. I know it's not fair. I'm not asking for fair. I'm telling you where I stand. She turned from the window. I'm not leaving, Mom. I'm not changing what I'm doing. And I'm not going to pretend that the people on this street are beneath me because their income doesn't match mine. That's not who I am. That's not who you raised me to be, whatever it is you think you're protecting right now. Her mother was quiet for a long moment. The board meeting is in 6 weeks, she said finally. I know when the board meeting is, Clara. I'll handle the board meeting, Clara said. I always do. She hung up. She went outside. Emma caught the ball, turned, saw her, and said immediately, Your face looks like Dad's face when something's wrong, but he's not going to tell me. I'm fine. That's what he says? 2. Clara sat down on the porch step. Emma came and sat next to her, close enough that their shoulders touched, the way Emma had been doing lately without acknowledging it. Just finding her way to Clara's side and staying there. Emma, Clara said, if something hard was happening, something complicated, would you want to know about it, or would you rather not? Emma thought about this seriously, which was the only way she thought about anything. Depends, she said. On what? On whether knowing helps. She bounced the ball once on the concrete. Like when Dad's going to deploy, knowing is hard, but then I can get ready. But sometimes, Mrs. Petrova tells me stuff that's just sad and doesn't help anything. She looked at Clara sideways. Is it the kind that helps? Clara looked at her. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Emma nodded like this was acceptable. Then wait till you know, she said. That's what Dad says, don't borrow trouble before it arrives. She threw the ball against the fence, caught it, handed it to Clara. Clara threw it. It hit the fence at a bad angle and bounced sideways into the yard. Emma retrieved it without comment, handed it back, and watched while Clara tried again. They did this for 20 minutes without talking. It was, Clara thought, one of the most comforting 20 minutes she'd had in years. The calls from her board members began the week after, arriving in a pattern that felt less like coincidence and more like choreography. First, Warren Sloan, who'd been on her board since the Series B, and who opened every difficult conversation with the same preamble. I'm saying this because I respect you, Clara, which he did, and which also meant nothing because respect and alignment were different things. The Sterling situation, Warren said. Richard's been making noise. He's saying the dinner ended badly. The dinner ended exactly as it should have. He's implying you're unstable emotionally. Richard Sterling implied I was a business opportunity over a $50,000 bracelet. His assessment of my emotional stability is not something I'm going to lose sleep over. Warren was quiet. Then what's happening with the Navy situation? The Navy situation? Clara repeated flatly. He cleared his throat. There are photos, Clara. People are drawing conclusions. Let them draw conclusions, Warren. I'm not managing a rumor. I'm living my life. At what cost to the company? She thought about Emma on the porch step. Don't borrow trouble before it arrives. Tell the board I'll see them at the meeting, she said. We'll talk about the company then. Right now, I'm going to go make dinner. She hung up before Warren could respond. Then came Margaret Fenwick, who was more direct and whom Clara had always respected for it. Margaret had built 3 companies herself, and had the particular clarity of someone who had no time left for indirection. Clara. Margaret didn't bother with preamble. I have one question. Are you in love with this man? Clara stopped moving. Because if you are, Margaret continued, that's not something I'm going to advise you about, and honestly, it's not my business. But the board is going to push, and I need to know if you're going to stand or fold. I've never folded in my life, Margaret. No, but you've also never had something to lose that wasn't a company. A pause. That's different. It changes the math. Clara stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, and looked at the cactus named Gerald on the windowsill, the nightlight still plugged in because Emma had decided he needed it. I know it changes the math, she said quietly. So? Margaret waited. I'll stand, Clara said. Good, Margaret said. Then I'll stand with you, but prepare yourself because they're going to make this ugly before they let it go. She hung up. Clara stood in the kitchen for a moment, then she called Joel. The connection took a minute to stabilize, that particular digital lag of thousands of miles. And when his face appeared on screen, he was clearly between things somewhere below deck, the lighting bad, and his expression already reading her the way he'd gotten good at from the very first morning over the fence. What happened? He said. Good evening to you, too, she said. Clara. She exhaled. Board pressure. My mother. Richard Sterling. Apparently. Making noise about. She stopped. Reorganized. People are drawing conclusions about what I'm doing here, about us, and they're using it to question my judgment. Joel was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? He asked. I'm going to handle it. That's not what I asked. She looked at him on the screen. The bad lighting, the miles between them, the pixelated steadiness of his face. I'm not going anywhere, she said. If that's what you're asking. It's not what I was asking, he said. But I'm glad to hear it. A beat. Emma okay? He asked. Emma is great. She gave me a lesson in not borrowing trouble today. He smiled. She got that from me. I figured. Clara. His voice dropped slightly, taking on that quality it got when he was saying something he'd thought about more than once. You don't have to fight this for us if it costs you too much. Joel, I mean it. I'm not going to be the reason you. Joel, she said again, more firmly. Stop. He stopped. I'm not fighting it for you, she said. I'm fighting it for me. Because I know who I am and I know what I want, and I am not going to let a board of directors and a man with a $50,000 bracelet tell me otherwise. She held his gaze through the pixels. Do you understand the difference? He looked at her for a long moment. Yeah, he said quietly. I understand the difference. Good. For what it's worth, he said. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. Coming from a Navy chief petty officer, she said. I'm choosing to take that as a compliment. It was, he said. Emma appeared at the edge of the frame. She'd been doing homework at the kitchen table, and had apparently decided the call had been adult only. Long enough. Dad. She crowded in next to Clara. Gerald grew. I measured him. Gerald cannot grow, Joel said. Gerald is a cactus. He grew 2 millimeters, Emma said with great conviction. I used a ruler. Show me. Emma leaped up to get Gerald. For the next 10 minutes, the conversation was entirely about the cactus, the ruler, whether millimeters counted as significant growth, and whether cactuses dreamed. Clara sat at the kitchen table and listened, and did not think about the board or her mother or Richard Sterling, or the photograph in the magazine. She just stayed there in the call, in the kitchen, in the life she'd chosen. The pressure escalated on a Thursday, 6 weeks before the board meeting, when a formal letter arrived from 3 board members. Warren, a man named Douglas Pratt who had joined the board at the Series C and who had the energy of someone perpetually disappointed in the world, and a 3rd member named Sylvia Cole, who was a close friend of Clara's mother, and whose presence on the letter made its origin completely clear. The letter was 3 pages long, and called itself a governance review. It was, in plain language, an ultimatum. It raised questions about leadership focus and reputational risk and the perception of decision-making clarity at the executive level. It cited the photographs. It cited the cancelled date with Richard Sterling framed delicately as a missed strategic relationship opportunity. It suggested, in language carefully groomed to avoid anything that could be called discriminatory, while implying exactly that Clara's personal choices raised questions about whether she remained wholly committed to the long-term interests of Clarion and its stakeholders. It requested formally a meeting. It suggested that meeting occur before the board meeting. It included a paragraph near the end that was the truest thing in the document, even if it was dressed as corporate concern. We believe the board has a responsibility to ensure that personal circumstances do not compromise the objectivity and independence required of a chief executive. Personal circumstances. Clara read the letter twice. Then she set it on the kitchen table. Emma was at school. The house was quiet. Gerald was on the windowsill. The sun was doing the thing it did in the afternoon through that particular window, making the kitchen look like something in a painting. She thought about the night she'd stood on the sidewalk in a $5,000 dress watching a man dance with his daughter. She thought about the morning she'd handed Joe coffee over the fence, and he'd looked at her like she was just a person. She thought about Emma saying, "I like it when she said that Clara and Joe were more than friends." She thought about a 3-page letter that called all of it a personal circumstance. She picked up her phone. Not to call her lawyer, which is what she should have done. Not to call Margaret, which is what the strategic part of her brain was recommending. She called Joel. He picked up in 2 rings, which meant he'd been near the phone. "Hey, I only have about 10 minutes, what's up?" "They sent a letter," she said. "A beat. The board. 3 of them. Warren, Pratt, and Sylvia Cole." "What does it say?" "It says I should choose." She paused. In governance language, very politely. "But that's what it says?" Joel was quiet for a moment. And, close quote, he said. "And nothing. I haven't chosen yet." She stopped. "I mean, I know what I want. I know what I'm going to do. I just needed to tell you before I talked to anyone else. I wanted you to know." Another beat, longer. "Clara." His voice was careful, deliberate, the way it got when something mattered. "Whatever you decide, I need you to decide it for the right reasons. Not for me. Not for Emma. For you. I know. Because Emma and I were going to be okay. We've been okay before. We know how to be okay." He paused. "But you've spent a long time building something. I don't want to be the reason, Joel." She stopped him. "Can I tell you something?" "Yeah. The night I moved to that house, I didn't tell anyone why. I told my team it was an investment. I told my mother I wanted a change. But the real reason..." She stopped, steadied herself. "I had a dinner with 3 board members the week before, and I sat there for 2 hours and I thought, these people will never know me. Not actually. They know my revenue and my projections and my competitive positioning, and that's all I am in this room." She exhaled. "And then I bought a house next door to a man who called me out to my face the morning after a terrible night without knowing who I was. Who let me help because I asked, not because I was useful. Who made room for me at a kitchen table, and never once made me feel like an acquisition." Silence. On the line. "So when people ask me what I'm choosing," she said, "the answer is that I'm choosing the first thing in my adult life that has ever felt completely real." Joel didn't say anything for a long moment. When he did speak, his voice was different, lower. Something had shifted in it. 9 more weeks," he said. "What? That's how long I have left." 9 weeks. A pause. "I just wanted you to know that number." She closed her eyes. 9 weeks, she said. "Yeah. Then come home," she said, "and we'll figure out the rest." The connection dropped 2 minutes later, his 10 minutes apparently exactly what they were. She sat at the kitchen table with the letter from the board and her phone and Gerald on the windowsill and thought, 9 weeks. Across the neighborhood, she heard a soccer ball hit a fence. Not Emma. Emma was at school. Just the neighborhood doing what it did, going about its life, quiet and ordinary and completely, irreversibly real. She met with her lawyer on Friday and her communications team on Monday, and Margaret Fenwick for coffee on Wednesday morning. And by the time she walked into the pre-board meeting with Warren, Pratt, and Sylvia Cole the following week in Toronto, she had done what she had always done when something mattered. She had prepared. She sat down at the table. She let them speak first, all three of them, in turns, the governance language, and the careful euphemisms, and the, "we just want what's best for the company." And she listened without interrupting, which she knew made people uncomfortable. When they finished, she opened the folder in front of her and slid 3 documents across the table. "Quarterly projections," she said, "up 14%. Product roadmap for the next 18 months. Investor confidence report from last week's calls." She looked at each of them in turn. "Clarion is performing. It has performed every quarter since I founded it. And my personal life, which is not, regardless of what this letter implies, a governance issue, has not changed that fact." Sylvia Cole leaned forward. "Clara, the perception." "The perception," Clara said evenly, "is that your CEO is a human being who lives in a neighborhood and has friends and is capable of caring about people who don't appear on a balance sheet. If that perception damages investor confidence, then we have investors who are not investing in a company. They're investing in a performance. And I'm not a performance." Silence. Warren cleared his throat. "The Sterling relationship." "The Sterling situation was not a relationship," Clara said. "It was a dinner. He told me a bracelet cost $50,000 and called us a strategic opportunity. I left." She met Warren's eyes. "If the board wants to add, must endure bad dates to my employment contract, I'd like I know." Douglas Pratt made a sound that might in the right light have been a suppressed laugh. Sylvia Cole did not look amused. "Clara," Sylvia said, "your mother—" "My mother is not on this board," Clara said with respect. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. Nothing was resolved. But Clara walked out of the building into the afternoon and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and she felt not relieved, not victorious, but something cleaner than either. Clear. She knew what was coming. She knew the board meeting in 3 weeks would be harder than that room. She knew the pressure would intensify, and the language would escalate, and there were people with significant financial stakes in Clarion who would push this as far as it needed to go. She also knew that 9 weeks had become 7. She got in her car. She drove to the airport and flew back to BC. Emma was on the porch when she pulled in, doing homework with Mrs. Petrova sitting nearby in the other chair. Emma looked up, registered Clara's face with that precise antenna she carried everywhere, and said, "How'd it go?" Clara got out of the car. "It went," she said. Emma considered this. Was it the borrowing trouble kind or the, "it actually arrived" kind? Clara looked at her, at this child, who was 7 years old and sharp as wire and living proof that love was not actually complicated, that it was the simplest thing in the world and everything around it was complicated. "It arrived," Clara said. Emma nodded. "Okay," she said. "Come sit down." Mrs. Petrova made cookies. Clara sat down on the porch. She took a cookie. She stayed. 7 weeks became 5. 5 became 3. 3 became 1. Clara had stopped counting days out loud. She did it quietly, privately. The way you track something you don't want to jinx by naming it too directly. She knew exactly how many days remained. The way she knew her own heartbeat without having to check. Emma was the opposite. Emma had a paper chain on her bedroom wall, the one at Clara's. Because somewhere in the last 2 months, Emma had started calling the guest room, my room. And Clara had not corrected her. And every morning, Emma tore off one link with a ceremony that was brief but non-negotiable. 23. Emma announced one morning, holding up the torn link before putting it in a small jar she'd labeled, "Days till Dad," in purple marker. "I see that," Clara said. That's not very many, Emma said. No, Clara agreed. It's not. Emma looked at the jar, then at Clara. Are you nervous? Clara was pouring coffee. She stopped. About your dad coming home? About everything. Emma pulled herself up onto the counter stool. Like after? What happens after? Clara set the coffee down. What do you mean? I mean. Emma picked at the edge of the jar's lid, careful and deliberate, the way she was when she was working up to something. Everything is different now from before he left. And when things are different, sometimes people don't know what to do and then everything gets weird. Clara looked at her. Who told you that? She asked. Nobody. I just know. Emma looked up. In my class, Mia's parents got divorced while her dad was working in Fort McMurray. And when he came back, everything was different, and nobody knew what to do about it. And now Mia has 2 Christmases. She paused. I don't want 2 Christmases. Emma. Clara sat down across from her. Your dad and I were not. I know, Emma said quickly. I don't mean that. I just mean. She stopped, tried again. I want things to stay like this. Is that okay to want? Clara held her gaze. Yes, she said. That's okay to want, even if it's complicated. Especially then. Emma studied her with the seriousness she reserved for important things. Miss Clara, do you love my dad? The question arrived the way Emma's questions always did, direct, unhedged, carrying the particular weight of a child who had learned that the world did not always volunteer its truth, and so she'd better ask for it plainly. Clara was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, she said. Emma blinked like she'd expected more resistance. Okay, she said. Okay. I mean, I already knew. I just wanted to hear you say it. Emma hopped off the stool and went to get her backpack. Dad loves you, too, by the way. In case you were wondering, Clara sat at the kitchen counter for a moment after Emma disappeared down the hallway. I was wondering, she said quietly to no one. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday in Toronto. Joel was due back in Esquimalt on a Saturday. The calendar had arranged itself this way without her permission, and she'd chosen to interpret it as the universe having a specific sense of drama. The week before the meeting, Douglas Pratt called her directly, not through counsel, not through the formal channels the process had established, but on her personal number, which meant someone had given it to him, and he wanted her to know he'd gotten it. Clara, he said, I want to talk before Thursday. Off the record. Everything's on the record, Douglas. You know that. Humor me. A pause. The room is not going to go well for you. Warren and Sylvia have 3 other members. That's 5. You need 6 votes to survive a confidence motion. I know how my own board works. Margaret is yours. Chen is yours. That's 3 with you. You need 3 more. And right now, you don't have them. He said it the way men like Douglas Pratt said everything, as though they were doing you a favor by explaining the situation you already understood. I'm offering you a way out. What kind of way out? Announce a planned transition. 6 months, orderly. You stay on as chair. Bring in an operational CEO. Clarion stays stable. Investors stay calm. And you? He cleared his throat. You get to do whatever it is you're doing in BC without it being anyone's business. Clara was quiet. That's a very clean package, she said. I thought so. It would also mean I spent 14 years building a company and then handed it to someone else because 3 board members were uncomfortable with who I was spending time with. Clara, I'm going to stop you there. Douglas. Her voice stayed level. She'd learned a long time ago that level was more effective than raised. What you're offering me is a way to lose gracefully. And I appreciate that genuinely. I know you think you're being kind, but I don't need a graceful exit. I need my board to remember that I am the reason Clarion exists. She paused. I'll see you Thursday. She hung up. Margaret called 20 minutes later. Pratt called you. Margaret said it wasn't a question. He did. What did you tell him? I'll see him Thursday. Margaret made a sound that was half approval, half concern. Clara, 5 to 4 is not a margin you can hold. I know. So, what's the plan? Clara was quiet for a moment. Do you trust me? She asked. I've trusted you since your series at Deck, Margaret said. But trust doesn't change the math. No. Clara agreed. But I'm going to say something in that room that changes the room, and I need you to let me do it my way. A long pause. Does your way involve burning anything down? Margaret asked. Possibly, Clara said, but only things that need burning. Thursday came the way high-stakes days always did, preceded by a night that moved too slowly, and a morning that moved too fast. Emma had slept over because it was a school night, and their routine had long since settled into something natural and unquestioned. Clara made breakfast. Emma ate with one eye on the paper chain and the arithmetic of 2 more days. She was wearing her soccer jersey under her school sweater, which was not technically allowed at school, but which Emma maintained was spiritually justified because it was almost Dad Week. Clara had not corrected this reasoning. At the door, Emma turned back. Miss Clara, she said, are you going to be okay today? Yes. For real or Dad okay? Clara smiled. For real. Emma looked at her for a moment. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper, and handed it over with the solemnity of someone presenting an important document. I made this last night, Emma said. Don't open it until after. After what? After whatever happens today. Emma shouldered her backpack. Mrs. Petrova's picking me up. I'll be at her house when you get back. She left. Clara stood in the doorway holding a folded piece of paper. She put it in the inside pocket of her jacket. Then she got dressed. Dark blazer, the watch her father had given her when she made her first million, which she wore only when she needed to remember that she had gotten here herself. Clean lines, no jewelry. She looked in the mirror. You know who you are, she told herself. Don't let them make you forget. The Clarion board met in a conference room on the 34th floor of a building in downtown Toronto. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The city laid out in every direction like a map of everything she had built toward, Lake Ontario stretching out beyond it. She had sat at this table 100 times. She took her seat at the head of it. They were all there, Warren, careful and watchful, Sylvia, dressed in the particular way of someone who had decided in advance how this meeting would go. Pratt, unreadable. The other 2 who had signed the letter, a man named Fisher and a woman named Aldridge, who had been quiet throughout the previous weeks, and whose silence Clara had read correctly as undecided. And on the other side of the balance, Margaret, steady and prepared, Howard Chin, who had been with her since the beginning, and whose loyalty was not unconditional but was earned and therefore real, and Remy Okafor, who was the youngest member of the board, and the one who had said nothing publicly but had texted Clara at 11 p.m. 2 nights ago. I'm listening. Make the case. 8 people. 1 table. 14 years. Warren opened the meeting. He was thorough, which was both his strength and his way of making the room feel heavier than it needed to. He covered the governance review language, the formal motion for a confidence vote, the procedural steps. He was, to his credit, fair about it, not cruel, not theatrical, just precise. Sylvia Cole spoke next. She was less restrained than Warren, though she maintained the vocabulary of corporate governance throughout. Reputational exposure. Leadership clarity. Stakeholder confidence. She cited 3 external analysts who had mentioned Clara's personal life in recent coverage in the Financial Post. She used the word distraction 4 times. Pratt said nothing. He'd made his offer. He was waiting to see what she did with it. Fisher and Aldridge listened. Then Warren looked at Clara. The board will hear from you now. Clara stood. She didn't open her folder. She didn't look at her notes. She had prepared, and then she had set the preparation aside because the thing she needed to say was not in her notes. I want to tell you about a Tuesday night in November, she said. Silence. I had dinner with a man who told me 3 times what a bracelet cost and asked me to consider what our 2 companies could build together. And I thought, Sitting at that table, this is what my life looks like. This is the best available version of what my world has to offer me. A man who sees my valuation and calls it attraction. She paused. I walked out. Drove to a house I bought on something close to instinct. In a neighborhood people in this room would call modest. Next door to a man who the next morning looked at me over a fence and said, "You look like you had a long day." Not because he knew who I was. Because he could see that I was tired. The room was very quiet. In 14 years, she said, I have sat in this room and made decisions that grew this company from a concept into something that employs 4,000 people. I have made those decisions under pressure, in crisis, in conditions that broke other companies. You have never once had cause to question my judgment in this room. She looked at Warren. And the first time you question it is because I have a home I love and people in my life who don't care about my revenue projections. She let that sit for exactly a moment. I want you to think about what that says, not about me. About us. About what we think a leader is supposed to be. Fisher shifted in his seat. Aldridge had stopped taking notes. I'm not resigning, Clara said. I'm not transitioning. I'm not taking a graceful exit. And I'm not apologizing for my personal life. What I am going to do, she reached into her folder and slid documents down the table, is show you this. Clarion's Q4 projections revised upward by 18%. The 3 partnership agreements that close next month. The product launch that moves us into a market segment we've been targeting for 2 years. She stood straight. My life outside this building has not cost this company one thing. Not $1. Not 1 point of confidence, not 1/4 of performance. What it has cost me is my willingness to pretend that a balance sheet is a substitute for a life. She sat down. The room stayed quiet. Warren said carefully, Clara. Call the vote, she said. He looked at her for a moment. All in favor of the confidence motion as written, he said. Warren. Sylvia. Pratt. Silence. Fisher looked at the papers in front of him. Then he looked at Clara. Opposed, he said. Aldridge? Opposed. Margaret? Opposed. Howard Chen? Opposed. Remy Okafor looked at Clara across the table. Opposed, he said quietly. And for the record, I think this board owes the CEO an apology. 5-3. Sylvia Cole put her pen down. Warren was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara and nodded once, without warmth, but without pretense either. The acknowledgement of a man who had calculated and found himself on the wrong side of the number. The motion fails, he said. She was in her car by 2:15. She sat in the parking structure for a few minutes without starting the engine. Her hands were steady. Her mind was very clear in the particular way it got after a high-stakes thing was over, not empty, but clean, swept. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out Emma's folded paper. She opened it. It was a drawing. Emma's drawings were always detailed beyond what you'd expect. She had her father's eye for proportion, and her own instinct for what mattered. This one showed 3 figures, a tall one in a navy uniform, a small one in a soccer jersey, and a medium one in what Emma had rendered with some authority as a blazer. They were holding hands underneath, in Emma's large, careful letters, "This is U.S. Don't forget." Clara sat in the parking structure on the 34th floor of 14 years of her life and held a child's drawing in both hands. She didn't cry. She came close. She started the car. She drove to the airport. She picked Emma up from Mrs. Petrova's at 6:30 Pacific time. Emma took one look at her face and said, "You won." "How do you know?" "Because you look like Dad looks when he's tired, but the good kind of tired." Emma took her hand as they walked across the street. "What happened?" "I told them the truth," Clara said. "About what?" "About what matters." She looked down at Emma. "About you and your dad and Gerald and not wanting to disappear." Emma thought about this for half a block. "Did it work? For men?" "Yes." Emma nodded. "Truth usually does," she said with the certainty of someone who had tested this theory and found it reliable. They went home. Clara made dinner. Emma did homework at the kitchen table. Gerald sat on the windowsill in the late afternoon light, exactly the same as always, growing his imperceptible millimeters, and the paper chain on the wall in Emma's room had 2 links left. 2 days. Joel was coming home. And Clara, who had built a $2.5 billion company and survived a board vote, and walked out of a restaurant on a Tuesday night in November, found that her hands were not quite steady when she thought about standing in front of him again. Not because she was afraid, but because some things matter enough to make your hands shake. And she had stopped pretending that this wasn't one of them. The last link came off the chain on a Saturday morning. Emma tore it slowly, not with the quick efficiency of every other morning, but carefully, like she wanted to feel the full weight of the moment. She held it in her palm, looked at it, then looked at Clara, who was standing in the doorway of my room with a cup of coffee and the particular expression of someone trying to appear calmer than they were. "Today," Emma said. "Today," Clara confirmed. Emma closed her hand around the paper link. "What time?" "The base called last night." "Estimated early afternoon. Could be 2, could be 3. Clara sat on the edge of the bed. "Could be 4 if there are processing delays." Emma considered this with great seriousness. "That's a lot of possible times." "It is. How do we wait?" Clara looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do we do while we're waiting?" "Because if we just sit here, I'm going to lose my mind." Emma said this with complete sincerity, using an expression she had clearly absorbed from an adult without knowing its history. "That's what Mrs. Petrova says. She says waiting without doing something makes her lose her mind." "Mrs. Petrova is a wise woman," Clara said. "We make breakfast. We clean up. You practice your penalty kicks in the backyard. And then we get dressed and we go." Emma was already off the bed. "What are you wearing?" "Clothes." "That's not an answer. You have to look nice." "It's Dad." Clara looked at her. "It's always Dad," Emma said as though this should be obvious. "Special occasion. You have to look like you tried." "I always look like I tried." Emma gave her a look that contained in miniature every opinion she'd kept politely to herself about Clara's work from home wardrobe over the past several months. "Emma." "I'm just saying," Emma said, disappearing toward the kitchen. "Dad's going to see you first thing. First impressions matter. We talked about this in school." "You talked about first impressions in 2nd grade? It applies to everything," Emma called back. Clara stood in the doorway of the small room that had become Emma's room. In the house that had become their house, on the street where everything had changed, and she laughed quietly, privately, to herself. The way you laugh when something lands so perfectly true that there's no other response. Then she went to her closet. She tried. They got to the Military Family Resource Center gathering area at CFB Esquimalt by 1:30. The space was already filling, families with signs and balloons and children in their good clothes, restless with the particular energy of people who have been waiting a long time and can now see the finish line. Wives and husbands holding babies that had been born during deployments. Parents who had driven from other provinces. Children Emma's age and younger, holding handmade banners in uneven letters. Emma had made a banner. She'd made it the previous Tuesday afternoon at Clara's kitchen table with poster board and markers while Clara was on a call, and she turned it face down when Clara tried to see it and said with great authority, "It's not ready." It was ready now. She carried it rolled under her arm with the gravity of someone transporting something important. "Can I see it?" Clara asked. "When Dad sees it," Emma said. "You're going to make me wait?" "It's more dramatic that way," Emma scanned the crowd. "He says they come out through the main gate over there." "I know. I've been to one of these before." Emma looked up at her. "When?" Clara paused. "Once," she said. "A few months ago. When Lieutenant Ferrara's husband came back. I stood over here with Mrs. Petrova." Emma studied her. "You came even then." "Mrs. Petrova invited me." "But you came," Emma said with the precision of someone who understood the difference between being invited and choosing to show up. "Yes," Clara said, "I came." Emma looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned back to the gate. "He's going to be so happy," she said quietly. Not to Clara specifically, more to herself or the air or the general fact of the afternoon. Clara did not trust her voice enough to respond. She put her hand on Emma's shoulder. Emma leaned back against her just slightly, the way she did when she wasn't paying attention to doing it. They waited. At 2:47, the gate opened. The sound that went through the crowd was not a cheer. Not at first. It was something more involuntary than that. A collective intake of breath, a shift, a current that moved through every person there. And then the cheering started, ragged and overlapping and completely sincere. And children ran forward and were caught, and grown adults pressed their hands to their mouths. And somewhere to Clara's left, a woman said, "Oh, thank God," in a voice that had nothing performed in it. Clara stood her ground. She told herself she would let Emma lead. That this moment was Emma's first and hers second, and she meant it. She lost track of that plan almost immediately because she saw him. He came through the gate with his unit, in his dress uniform, duffel over one shoulder. And even from this distance, the distance of a crowd and months, and everything that had happened since he'd raised his hand to her in a doorway at midnight, she knew his walk. She knew the particular way he held himself. She'd learned it on a sidewalk at 6:15 in the morning over a fence. Emma saw him at the same second. She didn't run. She exploded. "Dad!" The word came out at a volume that turned heads 10 yards in every direction. And Emma was moving before the sound finished, banner still under her arm, pushing through the crowd with the focused velocity of a 7-year-old who has been waiting months for this exact moment, and is not going to let anything, other people, physical obstacles, the laws of reasonable behavior slow her down. Joel saw her coming. He dropped his duffel. He caught her midair and she wrapped around him with both arms and both legs and pressed her face against his neck. And he held her with the kind of grip that comes from counting days. And he said something Clara was too far away to hear. But she saw Emma nod against his shoulder hard multiple times. And then Emma pulled back just enough to look at his face and say something back. And he laughed. And it was the real laugh, the one with no performance in it, carrying across the crowd and the noise and the months. Clara stayed where she was. She told herself she was giving them their moment. She also could not quite move. She watched Joel hold his daughter, and she felt something shift in her chest that she recognized by now. That sideways movement, the thing that had been happening since a Tuesday night in November when she'd stood on a sidewalk in a $5,000 dress and couldn't walk away from a lit window. Then Emma turned, still in Joel's arms, chin over his shoulder. She looked directly at Clara across the crowd and she pointed. Joel followed his daughter's direction. His eyes found her. Clara had prepared herself for this moment, in the abstract. She had thought about what she would say, how she would stand, what expression she would arrange on her face. She had, in the privacy of her own mind, rehearsed a version of this that was composed and graceful and appropriately measured. She did none of those things. She walked toward him. He set Emma down and walked toward her. They met in the middle of the crowd, in the noise, in the afternoon sun, and he stopped 2 feet in front of her, and looked at her the way he'd looked at her since the first morning over the fence, direct, unhurried, like he had the time to actually see her. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said. "You're here." "I'm here." He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "You won the board vote." She blinked. "Margaret told you." "Margaret told me." The corner of his mouth moved. "She also said Remy Okafor told them the board owed you an apology." He did. "Did they apologize?" Warren nodded. She said it counted. Joe looked at her. Something in his face that had been held carefully during the months, the maintenance of distance, the discipline of someone who knew better than to hold things too close when he was thousands of miles away, released. He stepped forward and put his arms around her. She pressed her face into his shoulder. Neither of them said anything. The crowd moved around them, other families finding each other, and Emma stood 3 feet away with her banner under her arm, watching with the expression of someone whose plan is going exactly right. When Joel and Clara separated, he kept his hands on her arms and looked at her face and said quietly enough that only she could hear, I thought about what you said on the call, about choosing the first thing that ever felt real. Joel, I need to say this, he said. I've been carrying it for 9 weeks and I need to put it down somewhere. He held her gaze. Before Danielle died, I thought I understood what it meant to have a family. And when I lost her, I thought that chapter was done. That Emma and I were the whole story and everything else was extra. Nice, maybe, but not necessary. He paused. And then you stood in your driveway with a coffee cup you'd forgotten was in your hand and told me you'd had a long day. And somewhere in the middle of that, somewhere in the fractions and the cactus and the dinners and the video calls, I stopped believing the chapter was over. He looked at her. You didn't just walk into our life, Clara. You held it together while I was gone. You fought for your place in it when people told you to leave. And Emma. His voice shifted on Emma's name. Emma asked me on our last video call if I loved you. I told her I did. She said she already knew and I should just come home and say it to your face. From 3 feet away, Emma said, I told you. You did, Joel said without looking away from Clara. Clara was quiet for a moment. I told her the same thing, she said. The morning after she asked me. I know, he said. She told me that, too. She tells you everything. She tells me everything, he confirmed. Clara looked at him, at this man who had called her out over a fence on a morning when she needed it, who had never once looked at her balance sheet, who had handed her his daughter and his trust, and gone thousands of miles away believing that she would hold both carefully. She had. I love you, she said plainly. No hedging, no soft landing, no careful management of how it would be received. Joel Carter looked at her in the middle of a crowd on a base in Esquimalt, British Columbia, on a Saturday afternoon in early spring with his daughter 3 feet away holding a banner. I love you, too, he said. Emma made a sound of profound satisfaction. Okay, she said. Now can we see the banner? She unrolled it. It was, Clara understood immediately, the best thing Emma had ever made. Poster board, markers, every color she owned, and the architectural ambition of someone who didn't yet know that you were supposed to plan these things out before you started. Across the top in large uneven letters, Welcome Home Dad. In the middle, the 3 figures from the drawing in Clara's jacket pocket, navy uniform, soccer jersey, blazer, holding hands. Emma had added a small square next to them that Clara recognized after a moment as a house. And across the bottom in the biggest letters of all, we are a family now. Joel looked at it for a long time. Then he crouched down to Emma's level. Yeah, he said. We are. Emma held the banner up higher. A woman nearby, a stranger, another family, someone who had been watching, started crying. Clara saw it and felt the back of her own throat tighten, and thought, I am not going to cry in front of 400 people and a Navy base. She cried a little in front of 400 people and a Navy base. Emma noticed and handed her a napkin from her jacket pocket. She had come prepared. They went home. The word landed in Clara's mind with a different weight than it ever had before. Not her home, not his home. Home. The single version. The one that included Gerald on the windowsill and a paper chain's worth of empty links in a jar labeled Days Till Dad, and a banner that was going up on the wall as soon as they found the right tape. Joel walked into his house first. He stopped in the middle of the living room and looked around, the particular look of a man recalibrating his surroundings after months away. He noticed things. A throw blanket that hadn't been there before. A book of Emma's on the coffee table. A drawing taped to the refrigerator. He noticed Gerald on the windowsill. Night light still plugged in. You brought Gerald here, he said. He needed company, Clara said. He's a cactus. Emma was very concerned about him. Joel looked at the cactus, then at Clara. Did he grow 2 millimeters? Emma measured. He shook his head slowly. That quiet private thing. He put his bag down. He went to the kitchen. He opened cabinets, not looking for anything specific, just relearning the geography, the way you relearn a language you've been away from. He ran the water for a second. He sat down at the kitchen table. He looked like someone who had come back to exactly the place he meant to come back to. Emma climbed up onto the counter stool and said, "Dad, we need to talk about what's next." Joel raised his eyebrows. "It's been 3 hours. I know, but there are things." "What things?" "Things like, is Miss Clara going to live next door forever, or is she going to live here? Because her house is right there, and our house is right here, and it seems like a lot of going back and forth." Emma delivered this with the efficiency of someone who had been thinking about it for some time. "I'm just asking for clarity." Joel looked at Clara. Clara looked at Joel. "Emma," Joel said carefully, "I'm not trying to rush anything." "Emma is," Clara said. "I'm just saying that her toothbrush is already here in the bathroom, the blue one." A beat of absolute silence. "It's convenient," Clara said. "It is," Emma agreed. "That's my point." Joel looked at his daughter, at the banner she'd set against the wall, at the jar of paper links on the counter, at Clara standing in his kitchen with her arms crossed, and an expression that was trying very hard not to be as moved as it was. "Okay," he said slowly. "What if we made some decisions together, like a family, without rushing?" Emma considered this. How slow is not rushing? "Emma, I'm asking a reasonable question. You're 7, almost 8, Emma said, "and I'm very mature." Joel looked at Clara. "She's not wrong," Clara said. "You're not helping," he said. "I'm not trying to help. I'm trying to be accurate." He looked at his daughter and his Clara, he thought, because sometime in the last 9 months the possessive had attached itself and he was done pretending it hadn't, and he understood that the two of them together were going to be the particular challenge and the specific joy of every day for the rest of his foreseeable life. He found he had no objection to that. "Okay," he said again. "Together. We figure it out together." Emma nodded. Satisfied. She picked up her backpack. "I'm going to unpack Gerald's stuff," she said, and disappeared toward the living room, taking the nightlight with her. Joel and Clara were alone in the kitchen. It was the first time they'd been alone together in months. The quiet was different from the quiet of video calls. It was real, fully dimensional, the kind that has weight. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I meant it," he said. "What I said at the base." "I know you did." "I'm not." He stopped, searched. "I'm not good at big speeches. I'm not Richard Sterling with a $50,000 bracelet. I'm a Navy chief petty officer with a cactus and a daughter who's already moved your toothbrush." "I know what you are," Clara said. "Then you know that what I'm offering you is real," she said quietly. "I know. That's the whole point, Joe. That's always been the whole point." He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed the kitchen. He kissed her. Not the first kiss either of them had imagined over 9 months of video calls and carefully managed distance. It was quieter than that and more certain. The kind of kiss that isn't an arrival, but a confirmation. The kind that says, "I knew this. I've known this." Finally, Emma yelled from the other room. They broke apart. Clara pressed her hand over her mouth. Joel put his forehead down briefly on her shoulder, shaking with a laugh he was trying to contain. "She's going to be a problem," he said. "She's going to be spectacular," Clara said. 6 months later, almost to the week, Joel Carter stood in the backyard of their house, the single house, the home, the one they'd made the decision about together. Like a family, without rushing, which had taken approximately 3 weeks on a Saturday morning with Emma beside him and Gerald visible through the kitchen window in his permanent position on the sill. Clara was on the porch with a cup of coffee, reading. The same way she'd been the morning the whole thing started, before deployments, and board meetings, and paper chains, and banners, and a drawing that still lived in the inside pocket of her good blazer. Joel had been thinking about this for weeks. He'd talked to Emma, who had received the information with the expression of someone who had been expecting it since approximately the day they met, and was relieved the adults had finally caught up. "Can I say something?" Emma had asked. "Yes, say it exactly right," she'd said. "Don't mess it up." He had practiced saying it exactly right approximately 40 times. He walked to the porch. Clara looked up from her book. He sat down in his chair, the one that had been his since the second month. The one that had stopped being a spare before either of them said so. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She lowered the book. "You can always ask me something. Remember the night you came home from that terrible dinner? The bracelet, the burgundy, the optics." She smiled. "I remember. You walked past my window. You stopped." "I stopped," she confirmed. "Why?" He looked at her. "I've never asked you. Why did you stop?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because you were dancing," she said. "And it was the first thing I'd seen in a long time that I didn't have a plan for. That I couldn't put in a spreadsheet, or a deck, or a 5-year strategy." She looked at him. "It was just real, and I'd forgotten what that looked like." Joel nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket. He'd chosen something simple. No $50,000 anything. A single stone, clean setting. The kind of ring that didn't try to outdo itself. The jeweler, a retired RCN man, it turned out, who worked a shop 2 miles from the base, had said, "The ring should say something." "What do you want it to say?" Joel had said. "I found you. I'm not letting go." "That's it," the jeweler had said. "That's the whole thing." He opened the box. Clara's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Emma appeared in the doorway behind them. She had been inside watching through the kitchen window with the focused intensity of a director monitoring her production, and stayed very still. "Clara Davidson," Joel said. "You stood on a sidewalk and watched through a window because you recognized something you'd been missing, and you stayed. Through the deployment, and the board and the magazine articles and my mother's cactus." "Our cactus," Emma said quietly from the doorway. "Our cactus," he confirmed without breaking his gaze. "You stayed because you chose us every day without anyone making you." He held the ring out. "I want to make it official. I want to wake up in the same house and sit on the same porch and argue about Gerald's growth rate and watch Emma graduate and drive each other crazy in the ways that only people who really love each other can." He looked at her. "Will you stay? Officially? Permanently? As family?" Clara looked at the ring. She looked at Joel. She looked at Emma in the doorway, standing very still, holding her breath with both hands pressed together like she was making a wish. "Yes," Clara said. It came out clean. No hesitation, no qualifying. Just the single syllable that contained everything. All of it. The sidewalk and the fence and the fractions and the paper chain, and the board vote, and the months, and the morning over the coffee cup when a man in a driveway had looked at her like she was just a person. Emma exhaled so hard she had to grab the doorframe. Joel slid the ring on Clara's finger. He stood up. She stood up. He kissed her again, less reserved than the kitchen. Emma made an enthusiastic sound and they both started laughing and couldn't quite stop. And Emma launched off the porch step and wedged herself between them with both arms out, and Joel lifted her, and Clara put her arms around both of them, and for a moment it was just the three of them, loud and tangled and completely real. Mrs. Petrova appeared from across the street. She had, it became immediately clear, been watching from her porch. "Finally," she called. Emma yelled back, "I know, that's what I said." The morning went on around them. The neighborhood did what it always did. Someone's dog barked. A car started. The sun moved. Gerald sat on the windowsill, growing his imperceptible millimeters as present and reliable as anything they owned. And on a quiet street in Esquimalt, British Columbia, a woman who had walked out of a restaurant on a Tuesday night in November and stopped on a sidewalk for a reason she couldn't name, stood with her arms around a Navy man and his daughter, and understood completely and without reservation that she had not stopped walking by accident. She had stopped because some part of her had recognized before her mind caught up that the thing she'd been building toward her entire life was not a company. It was this. It had always been this. And it was worth every single thing she had fought to keep.